Hello, and welcome to Starbound. My name is I Am Duck, and I'll be your narrator. If you enjoy human-created HFY stories and want to support us, we're on Patreon now. You'll also get access to exclusive stories you won't hear anywhere else. Link is in the description. Now let's get into it.
The canyon had no interest in them. That was the thing about Argentis. It did not threaten. It did not stalk. It simply existed, indifferent, vast, and if you made a mistake in it, the consequences were a matter of physics rather than malice. Johnny Gage had worked a dozen worlds that felt hostile. This one just felt odd. The canyon walls were old rust and layered shadow. He picked his way down the scree slope with the economy of someone who had done this on worse terrain, in worse conditions, for 15 years. The loose rock shifted under his boots, testing, adjusting, settling. His weight went where it needed to go. His hands stayed loose at his sides, ready but not braced. Ahead and below, the wreckage of Survey Drone 4 lay against the canyon wall. One rotor assembly twisted back at a wrong angle, the cargo pod appearing to be intact. The Geological Survey puts this formation at 0.7 on the Crow's Instability Index, Teague said from 2 meters behind him. I know. 0.7 is considered marginal for foot traffic. I know that too. The surface composition makes fixed anchor placements inadvisable, Teague had noted before they started down. A pause. Then, I am logging my objection. Logged, Johnny said. Watch the loose stuff just to your left. Step wide of it. There was a careful shuffling sound as Teague adjusted his line. Johnny did not look back. He knew what he would see. The tesserae moving with the deliberate, considered grace of a species that had evolved to treat its own skeleton as a liability, placing each long foot with the care of a man crossing ice, his large black eyes reading every centimetre of the slope before he committed weight to it. Teague was exact. The fauna report for the sector mentions a nesting ground for Argentis pit crawlers within 400 metres of our current position, Teague said. Pit crawlers won't bother us if we don't bother them. The fauna report does not distinguish between deliberate and incidental provocation. Teague. Yes? The drone is right there, Johnny said. We go down, we pull the data core, we come back up. 40 minutes. Another pause, shorter than the first. 40 minutes, Teague agreed, and said nothing else. That was the shape of things between them. After 8 months working the outer survey circuits together, Teague flagged everything because that was how his mind worked, and because on a world like Argentis there was genuine value in having someone who flagged everything. Johnny made the call because someone had to, and he had been making calls like this since before Teague had finished his xenobiology doctorate. On surveys that had made Argentis look hospitable, they did not always agree. They had long since stopped needing to. The slope leveled briefly into a narrow shelf of compacted rock, 30 meters above their canyon floor, and Johnny paused on it to check his footing and look at the drone below. The cargo pod had held. The data inside it was 6 weeks of geological survey that the consortium needed badly enough to send 2 people down a 0.7 slope, which was why they were here rather than flagging the wreck from orbit and moving on. He started down the lower section. Steeper here, the scree finer, more mobile. He slowed, slightly. Not much. Enough. Wind is picking up, Teague observed. Yep. Their barometric reading suggests we have perhaps 90 minutes before conditions deteriorate significantly. Then we've got plenty of time. Johnny stepped over a fissure in the rock face, judged a larger loose section to his right, and angled left to avoid it. Stop reading the barometer and watch where you're putting your feet. I am capable of doing both simultaneously. I know. Do both quietly. He heard something that might, from a human, have been a sigh. From Taig it was simply the absence of further comment, which amounted to the same thing. They reached the drone shortly after. The drone had come to rest on a secondary shelf, maybe 10 or 15 meters above the canyon floor proper. Up close, the damage was worse than it had looked from above. The starboard rotor housing had been sheared clean off, and the navigation array had taken a direct impact from something, a rockfall by the scatter pattern around the impact site. But the cargo pod was latched and sealed. Johnny crouched beside it and checked the release mechanism. Intact. He unclipped the recovery line from his pack harness and began threading it through the pod's anchor points. "The anchor points are rated for 200 kilograms, Taig said, crouching on the other side of the drone to examine the pod housing. His long fingers traced the seam of it with professional attention. "The pod, fully loaded, is approximately 140 kilograms. "I know. I am merely confirming the margin is adequate." "It's adequate." Johnny finished, threading the line, and began securing the clip. "Seal look good to you?" "The seal looks intact. Some superficial scoring on the outer casing, but nothing that would compromise the internal environment." Taig stood straightening to his full height, nearly a head taller than Johnny, his large black eyes scanning the slope they had descended. "The return trip will be more difficult with the added weight." "That's why we've got the line." Johnny stood, tested the connection with a firm pull. Solid. He glanced up at the sky, which had shifted from pale yellow to a deeper amber in the time it had taken them to descend. They had time, but not much of it. He reached for the data core release. The canyon spoke first. It was a sound more felt than heard, a low, structural groan that moved up through the soles of his boots and into his legs before it registered as sound at all. Not rock settling, rock failing. Johnny had heard that sound twice before in his career, once on Devaris 4 and once in the Hellion Range, and both times it had meant the same thing. He was already moving. Taig, left, the outcropping. "Move!" He did not wait to see if Taig moved. He put a hand on the cint of Taig's back and shoved, hard, in the direction of the rock shelf to their left. The stable formation had marked on the way down out of professional habit. Taig went. Johnny saw him grab the rock face, both hands secure. The slope came down. It began at the top of the lower section, and it came fast. A wave of rock, loose dirt, and the fine grey scree that had shifted under Johnny's boots on the way down. It took him before he had covered 2 steps, sweeping him sideways and down in a torrent of grinding weight and noise, the sharp percussion of larger rocks striking each other in the chaos. He did not fight it. You did not fight a slide. You rode it and you protected your head and waited for it to stop. It stopped. The dust settled slowly, drifting in the freshening wind, carrying the sharp mineral smell of broken rock. Above him, at the outcropping, Taig's pale blue-grey frame was a still, vertical line against the canyon wall. Below the outcropping, Johnny was not moving. The dust was still in the air when Taig moved. He came down from the outcropping with a care that was, under the circumstances, exquisite. Each placement exact, each transfer of weight measured and confirmed before the next step followed. His long frame picked through the rubble of the slide with the unhurried exactness that was simply how he moved, always, and Johnny watched him come from a lying position and thought, he needs to move faster. Taig reached the canyon floor and covered the remaining distance at a pace that was, for him, something close to a run. He stopped when he reached Johnny. He did not crouch immediately. He stood for a moment looking down, assessing what he saw. He was flat on his back. The slide had carried him off the shelf 10 meters down, maybe more. He could tell by the angle of the canyon walls above him. His ears were still ringing. He began taking stock. The thought arrived without urgency. Everything was arriving without urgency. Johnny knew it, recognized it as a variable to be managed, filed it anyway, and kept taking stock. Left leg. He reached down without looking, running a finger along the outside of his thigh until he found the shape of the wrong thing. There, a deviation in the line of the femur, slight but unmistakable. The thigh was already beginning to swell. He moved his hand down past his knee, down the length of his shin to his ankle. He pressed 2 fingers against the inside of the joint, feeling for the pulse there. Faint and cold. He did not move his fingers. He kept them in place and felt the temperature of his own skin against them, and thought about what he meant in clinical terms, which was the only way to think about it. The femur had displaced. The bone end was pressing against the femoral artery. Not severed, because he'd know about that already. The compression was enough that the blood arrived below the break was insufficient. The foot would continue to cool. Tissue would begin to suffer. The window was small. He checked the pulse again. Still there. Still faint. Still cold. He was thinking about this when Tague reached him and knelt at his side with the scan already deployed. The device already in his hand and active before his knees touched the ground. Points in favor of working with someone meticulous. "Do not move," Tague said. Wasn't planning on it. The scanner's emitter swept the length of Johnny's leg, a thin line of pale light moving from hip to boot. The holographic display resolved above the device, rendering the injury in the tesserae biological model that the scanner had been built to read. He could see the image from here, the femur rendered as the lattice structure of tesserae bone, semi-flexible, the break read as a catastrophic collapse of that structure, the lattice shattered, and irrecoverable. He looked at his own leg, rendered in the wrong language. Every measurement accurate. Every conclusion wrong. The scanner was reading him through a framework built for a different species, returning a verdict that was both completely correct and had nothing to do with him. It was doing exactly what it had been built to do. It simply had no model for what it was looking at. "Johnny!" Tague's voice carried the flatness of someone working hard to keep it flat. "This is a non-recoverable structural failure. The primary load-bearing lattice is compromised across a complete transverse section. There is no regenerative pathway for this degree of damage." "That's not what it is." "The scanner!" "The scanner was built for tesserae bone." Johnny moved his hand back to his ankle, still cold, still faint. "It's reading my femur the way it would read one of yours. They're not the same thing. What I have is a closed fracture on the femur. One clean break. It's going to heal." A pause. He could see Tague processing this, running it against his framework and finding the space between the scanner's verdict and Johnny's certainty. "The structural damage is complete," Tague said, more quietly. "For a tesserae it would be. For me it isn't. The bone will knit. That's what human bone does." He met Tague's large black eyes. "I need you to get the comms unit out of the pack. Call for evac and tell them what we've got." Tague held his gaze for a moment, then reached for the pack that had come to rest 3 meters away, half buried in debris. He dragged it clear, unclipped the outer flap, and lifted out the long-range communications unit. He set it on a flat rock and opened the casing. Johnny watched him look at it. "Report," Johnny said. "The interface connections." Tague's voice was careful and controlled, in the way of a man delivering a diagnosis he would prefer not to give. "Both contact points took the impact. The cells are intact. The connections are not." He set the unit back on the rock. "There is no way to connect the power cells." "Try it." Tague tried it. The unit sat dark and silent on its rock. He tried it again. "I know." He had felt something go in the pack when the rocks came down. He had hoped he was wrong. Johnny looked up at the strip of amber sky visible between the canyon walls. He thought about the mission profile. 2 personnel, survey classification, check-in every 72 hours. The next scheduled contact was in 3 days. No one would know they were missing until the check-in window opened and stayed empty. He moved his hand back to his ankle. The pulse was there. The cold was still there. The window was real and it was not infinite, and the clock was running. He organized himself the way he did before difficult extractions. 1 breath, taken steadily, the kind that had settled rather than steeled. Right, Johnny said. New plan. He looked at Tague, who was still crouched over the useless communications unit with the expression of someone whose models had just stopped returning outputs. Close the pack, Johnny said. Come here. I need to explain some things to you. And I need you to pay close attention, because I'm going to need you to do all of them. Tague closed the pack. He came and crouched beside Johnny, large black eyes still, the scanner steady in his hand. Whatever was in his expression, it was not panic. It was attentive, still. He was going to need it. The first thing, Johnny said, is that I need you to understand that what I'm about to describe is standard field medicine. It is not experimental. It is not a last resort in the way you might be thinking of last resorts. It is simply what we do. He watched Tague's face as he said it, watched the careful readiness in it, watched the moment just before Johnny continued when something shifted in Tague's expression, very slightly, into a territory that was not quite fear. The fear was, however, close enough to see it from there. Good, Johnny thought. Pay attention. The bone has to go back, Johnny said. Tague's large black eyes did not move from Johnny's face. I do not understand, he said, in the voice of someone who understood perfectly and was hoping to be corrected. The femur has displaced. The broken end is pressing against the artery that supplies my lower leg. My foot is cold because not enough blood is getting through. If we leave it, the tissue below the break starts to die. Johnny kept his voice level. The bone has to go back where it belongs. You're going to help me do that. A silence. The wind moved through the canyon above them. A low sound that was almost nothing. You're describing forcing the bone back into position, Tague said. Manually. In the field. Yeah. Without stasis support. Without reconstruction technology. Without... He stopped, recollected himself. This would be considered an act of extreme violence against an injured patient. The light shifted in his large black eyes, something involuntary. A Tesseri stress response that he brought under control before it fully surfaced. His long fingers pressed flat against his thighs. By Tesseri medicine, not by human medicine. Johnny held his gaze. I need you to listen carefully to me now. I'm going to walk you through the whole procedure, and then I'm going to walk you through everything that follows it, because I may not be in a position to direct you once it's done. You need to know the complete sequence cold, the process itself, and aftercare, before you start reducing the fracture. Tague looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly longer than a moment. Then he gave one nod. Johnny talked. He laid it out the way he would brief a trainee, in plain language, not leaving anything out. First, the reduction itself. Tague would take hold of Johnny's boot with both hands, firm grip. He would pull, straight traction, along the line of the leg, sustained and steady. The purpose was to create enough length in the muscle compartment to allow the displaced bone end to move. Once the traction was established, Johnny would guide the alignment from above, his hands on his own thigh to feel and direct the bone end back into position. Tague would hold the traction constant throughout. He would not ease off regardless of what Johnny did or said during the procedure. He would not stop until Johnny told him to stop. Taig's expression did not change. His eyes did not leave Johnny's face. "During the procedure, I'm going to be in significant pain," Johnny said. "I want to be clear about that in advance. I will make noise. You're going to ignore the noise and maintain the traction. The noise is not information. It is a side effect." Something moved in Taig's face at that. Something controlled and fast that was there and gone. "Second," Johnny continued, "if I lose consciousness during or after the reduction, you do not wait for me to come round. You proceed immediately to the post-reduction sequence. Check for breathing and pulse first. Then you proceed." He walked Taig through the post-reduction sequence step by step. Antiseptic from the red-capped vial in the left outer pocket of the medicine kit, applied to the area around the fracture site. Compression wrap from the same pocket, applied from the ankle upward, firm and even, no gaps, no slack. Then the splint, flat pack, bottom of the main compartment grey case, 2 sections hinged. It would open flat, curve to the shape of the leg and lock. Taig would secure it with 5 straps, working up from the ankle. Ankle, mid-shin, below the knee, above the knee, and one above the fracture site on the upper thigh. "Not so tight the straps restrict circulation," Johnny said. "Tight enough to hold." "How will I distinguish between the two?" "2 fingers under each strap. If you can't get them under, it's too tight." Taig nodded, filing this away with the same attention he gave everything. "Then the checks," Johnny said. 3 of them, run in order. You remember what you're looking for." He held up a finger. "First, the skin color at the foot. You want pink, not white, not blue. Pink means the blood is getting through. Second, another finger. Temperature. Press the back of your hand against the sole of my foot. You want warm. If it's still cold after reduction, that is information and it means the procedure was incomplete. Third finger. Third. Pulse. Inner ankle, 2 fingers. Sustained pressure for 30 seconds. You're not looking for a strong pulse. You're just looking for one." He lowered his hands. "Pink, warm, and a pulse at the ankle," Johnny said. "This is what success looks like." Taig was quiet for several seconds. His eyes moved to Johnny's leg, then back to his face. "You've done this before," Taig said. "This procedure." "Not in myself." "But you've performed it." "Yeah." Taig looked at him steadily. Then he reached to his belt and freed the emergency recorder, a small flat device, short range only, transmit function only. He held it for a moment, then activated it. The indicator light confirmed broadcast status, transmitting destination unknown, receipt unconfirmed, into the void. A log that might be recovered and might not, that might reach someone who would act on it and might reach no one at all. He began to dictate. His voice was controlled and even the way it always was. He reported the situation in the order distress log required. The landslide, the injury, the communications failure, their position, the 3-day window until he missed the check-in. The recorder took it all down and sent it out into the canyon and beyond, to whatever was listening or wasn't. Then he reached Johnny's plan. He ended the log with, "They snapped the bone back," in a tone of wonder. The precision faltered, not dramatically, a fraction, enough that Johnny heard it. Taig stopped dictating. He looked at the recorder in his hand, at the small, steady light of transmission that might be going nowhere. Then at Johnny's leg. Then the far canyon wall. The question came out quiet, directed at no one in particular, or at the recorder, or at the void it was broadcasting into. "They snapped the bone back." "Yeah," Johnny said. A beat. "Are you ready?" Johnny said. Taig closed the recorder and clipped it back to his belt. He looked at Johnny's leg for a long moment, the expression of a man taking the full measure of a thing he has not encountered before. Then he looked at Johnny's face. "Tell me where to put my hands," he said. Johnny told him. Taig repositioned himself at the foot of the makeshift clearing, his long fingers closing around Johnny's boot with care. His grip was firm. His hands were not shaking, which Johnny noted and was glad of. Johnny folded a strap from his pack harness into a thick pad and put it between his teeth. The strap tasted of sweet synthetic fibre and years of hard use. He set his hands on his thigh, above the fracture, where he could feel the swelling and the shape of things beneath the fabric. He checked his position. He checked Taig's. "On my count," Johnny said. 3, 2, 1. Taig pulled. The resistance was the first thing, a dense, unyielding refusal from the muscle mass of Johnny's thigh, a solidity that Taig clearly had not anticipated, because the pull stuttered for a long moment before he leaned into it and drove through. Johnny felt the traction engage, the slow, terrible lengthening as the muscle stretched and gave, and he made a sound into the strap that came from somewhere below decision or language. "More," Johnny managed. "Straight. Don't angle." Taig pulled harder. His jaw was set. His eyes didn't leave Johnny's face. Johnny's hands pressed and guided through the agony, feeling for the shift that would tell him the bone end was moving. The world narrowed down to that search. Everything else was noise. The shift came, a yielding in the resistance, small and specific, the structure of it informing his hands before it informed his mind. He adjusted the angle, a fraction left, feeling the end of the bone move under his hands with a sensation that had no equivalent to anything he had experienced before. "Hold," he said. "Hold that exactly." He moved his hands and pressed, firmly, deliberately, and the structure of the thing shifted under his palms, and the bone end found its way back to the geography it belonged to. Then the sound. Johnny made a sound that the strap didn't contain. It went out into the canyon, and off the canyon walls and came back. Taig dropped his boot and sat down hard. The strap fell from Johnny's mouth. He did not say anything. There was a long breath, ragged and slow. His hands fell away from his thigh. Then he was still. Taig did not move for a long moment. He stood where he had scrambled to, one step back from where Johnny lay, and he looked at the man on the ground. The chest was moving. Barely, shallowly, but moving. Taig's own chest was doing something similar, and he became aware of this and brought it under control. 1 breath, 2. Then he moved. The scanner was in his hand already. He dropped to his knees beside Johnny and swept it, not trusting what he could see, trusting only his data. The display resolved. He read it. Blood pressure critically low, pulse rapid and thready. The readout stuttering at the margins in a way that the scanner's threshold indicators flagged in amber. Amber, not red yet. The numbers were moving, not improving, not declining either, stabilizing. Taig looked at the narrow plateau of those numbers and chose to interpret it as a mandate rather than a reprieve. Johnny had given him a sequence. He had given it in the careful, considered way of someone who had understood that he might not be available to give it twice. Taig had listened. He had filed it. He was going to do it now. He found the medical kit under the pack's outer flap, red-capped vial, left outer pocket. He located it, uncapped it, and applied the antiseptic to the area around the fracture site with a thoroughness that was, he recognized, distantly, slightly more than the situation required. He applied the compression wrap from the ankle upward, checking the tension as he went, pressing his palm flat against each layer to check for evenness and slack. He was aware that his hands were not entirely steady, and he attended to this as a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be felt. The splint was where Johnny had said it would be. Grey case, bottom of the main compartment. Taig opened it and examined the components with the rapid focus he brought to any unfamiliar equipment. 2 sections hinged at the center. He opened it flat, shaped it to the line of the leg, felt it lock. He secured the first strap at the ankle, the second at mid-shin, the third below the knee, the fourth above the knee, the fifth on the upper thigh, above the fracture site. He checked on each one with 2 fingers. Then he checked them again. When it was done, he sat back on his heels and looked at the splint, at the clean, functional lines of it, at the strap seated correctly and the frame holding the leg in the alignment it needed to maintain. He had built this from instructions given to him by the man it was keeping alive. Johnny's face, still and pale, the scanner's amber indicators edging incrementally toward a better threshold. He did not speak. There was nothing to say to an unconscious man. He sat in the rubble beside Johnny and listened to the wind move through the canyon above them. He ran the ankle checks at intervals, pink, cold, pulse present. The scanner numbers moved in a direction that was not deterioration. He held that for what it was. Not enough. But not nothing, and he waited. At some point, he understood that to survive, they'd need shelter. The waiting seemed to pass more quickly if his hands were busy. The shelter took him nearly 3 hours to make. 14 minutes in, with the scanner reading stable and the wind beginning to carry the cold, Tague looked at the drone wreckage scattered across the canyon floor, then at Johnny. Then he got to work. The canopy panels were rated for weather protection. It turned out they were rated for other things, too. He worked methodically. He had never built a field shelter before. He applied what he knew. The panels needed an angle. The line would hold them. He worked out the geometry as he went. He started with what he was certain of. The wall, the wind direction, the anchor points already in place. He angled the panels against the canyon wall to block the prevailing wind direction. He secured them with the drone's recovery line, still threaded through the cargo pod's anchor points from Johnny's earlier work. He laid out the supplies from the pack in the order he would need them. Scanner, medical kit, water pouches, nutrition packs. He ran the vascular checks every 20 or 30 minutes throughout the construction. Pink, cold, but less so than before. Pulse, present. At some point during the construction, the check was different. He pressed the back of his hand against the sole of Johnny's foot and held it there. And what he encountered was not the diminishing cold of restricted circulation. It was warmth. He held his hand there for longer than the check required. He noted it in the recorder log. Then he sat back and held that for a moment. The warmth of it, the fact of it, before he went back to work. Johnny surfaced slowly, disorientated, finding himself in a place he didn't immediately recognize. His body's shock response had knocked the worst of the pain down to manageable distance. Gotta love science, Johnny thought musily. His eyes opened, closed, opened again and stayed open. Tague reached for the scanner without being asked, and he ran it and read the display. Better. Meaningfully better. He set the scanner down. Then, without being asked, he moved to Johnny's feet. He pressed 2 fingers to the inside of the ankle, at the pulse point Johnny had showed him. Then he found it. He noted the skin color at the foot. He pressed the back of his hand to the sole. He held it there. The skin was different, not the waxy cool of restricted tissue, no longer waxy, warm. Then he reached into the medical kit and set a water pouch and an analgesic tab within Johnny's reach. He sat. Your foot is warm, he said.